Welcome to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series, a digital program started in 2020 bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Marc Appel, founder and CEO of Orange Grove Bio and creator of the From the Patient's Eyes podcast series.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I have 9:01, so we'll get going. My name is Jennifer Hawksland, and I am the CEO at New York Bio. We're thrilled you're here for another edition after our 1 week hiatus for a summer break last week, where, truth be told, I was in Alaska and I didn't have cell service. So there was very little way that we were going to have a conversation with me in the middle of nowhere without cell service. So we're glad to be back with you. We're glad to be back and to have Marc Appel as our guest today from Orange Grove Bio. As always, please put your questions in the chat and the Q&A box, and Derek and I will get to those throughout the discussion with Marc this morning. But other than that, oh, and mark your calendars. You'll hear me say this a lot now if you're one of our weekly listeners. Mark your calendars. Monday, September 27th is the New York Bio annual meeting, and we will be back in person. We trust that we are all putting our vaccines to good use, and we're looking forward to having an in-person meeting downtown in the financial district on Monday, September 27th. With that, I'll turn it over to Derek to do a more thorough introduction of Marc and kick off our conversation. Thanks, everybody. If we have Derek or not. So I'll kick it off. So Marc, thanks so much for joining us today. As you may know from listening, and as our attendees know, we like to start with an origin story. And in fact, the couple of times we haven't, we've literally gotten chats and messages saying, well, what's the background? What's the origin story? So we won't make that mistake again. Can you give us a little bit of background about yourself? And then we'll work that into talking about Orange Grove Bio after that.
Sure. So I'm actually a lawyer by training, so a little bit unusual for the early stage biotech world. But you actually find that actually a lot of law pops up in drug development, and both from a regulatory side and from a legal and structuring side. So it's actually come in handy over the years. I spent most of my career in the healthcare investing space, initially in the public markets focused arena at a firm called Marathon, where I helped to build their public markets healthcare effort. And we were investing across everything from hospitals to PBMs to pharma companies to biotech. So really gave me some very broad perspective across the industry. I think that's actually been very helpful because really there's very little out there that I haven't already seen in one way, shape, or size prior to this. Also had spent a stint at McKinsey earlier than that in my career, which was also helpful from the operating side because I actually went from a career in investing to jumping back into the operating world, which was a little bit of a sharp jolt, right? To go from sort of allocating money to actually having your neck on the line when experiments go right or wrong. And then kind of the later part of my time at Marathon, I helped to build a royalty fund for them. So we were really focused. It was really recent years have been really a period where alternative financial structures in pharma and biotech have really boomed, and it's really been a blessing for the industry, right? Because historically, right, your only option was you could raise common equity, or you should raise preferred equity, or you'd have common equity in place, eventually you'd IPO and go to the public markets. You didn't have all the different alternatives like selling off a royalty stream, or putting structured debt onto your balance sheet, or going public via a SPAC, right? There's multiple ways to kind of create value in biotech, and actually this is part of why I guess the banking industry in biotech has done so well. You need a lot more advice when there's so many options out there. So, but overall, net positive, and it's something that we've really brought to bear in the building of Orange Grove, because we said, whenever we're building these new companies, as they grow, we want to be very mindful as to like what's the right way to exit these opportunities, or what's the right way to pass them on to the next opportunity, or even just to raise the next round of financing. Should all be equity, should include some debt in there, etc.
Oh, sorry, I thought Derek was about to ask a question. I think he's locked up again.
No, I was going to jump in. I didn't quite freeze up, but so that's really true. So where did the vision for Orange Grove kind of come out of? And you can kind of weave in a little bit of, what was a vision and what's the actual kind of, operating strategy for the company?
Yeah, so the initial idea was really came from my time, which I still do today, serving as DIR with Yale and their Blavatnik Fund, and giving advice to the early stage research ideas that are coming out of academia there, and figuring out how we should allocate some of the money that the university has to deploy to further that research. And what I recognized was a lot of great stuff at Yale. I should have done a really good job in really publicizing that over the past few years. But there frankly is never enough, entrepreneurship around the table, right? It's a problem that we face really across the early stage biotech spectrum. It doesn't matter if you're in, New York, or if you're in Philadelphia, if you're in somewhere in Ohio. They're the same problems emerge, and that there's a lot of great research. There's not nearly as much in terms of the entrepreneurial activity around it, because there's just not enough good experienced entrepreneurs. There's also not enough of the right kind of capital. And so the idea behind Orange Grove was, could we bring some of those resources to bear and really go as far afield from the typical hubs where people focus as possible? So can we spend less time on Boston, San Francisco, and really spend more time on places that have a ton of research and a lot of potential, but aren't usually as focused on, which, I think New York's starting to change that, but historically New York had been one of those places that had been underserved. And so the kind of mid-Atlantic area for us has been a big focus. And then also in the Midwest, where we really see a lot of opportunity to provide some of what Boston has to that part of the country.
Yeah, we had Terry Willie on not too long ago from Indiana. And so, yeah, so we even we in New York are interested in what our colleagues are doing across the country. How did you figure out where to focus sort of first with that sort of non, typical hub thought in mind?
Yeah, so really we went down the tables as pretty easily available information of where is the most research dollars being spent by the government, right? It's a pretty easy data pull, publicly available. You can find exactly how much SBIR, STTR money is going where in the country. And you'll be shocked to find that Boston and San Francisco aren't the biggest places by any stretch. In fact, New York has a number of the top institutions that fall into that category, and you'll be surprised. Some of the big Midwestern hubs like University of Michigan or OSU are right up there in the top 10. And so for us, let's find the biggest research institutions. Let's talk to them about what the problems they're facing, or is there a way for us to be able to interface and become a meaningful part of that ecosystem, and then that way sort of narrow in on where we should be focusing our efforts first. And really coming out of that, two of the first two hubs that we started, and actually built companies in both locations, were Ann Arbor, Michigan, and New York City, right? Those were two that really bubbled to the top for us. Obviously now we're talking and working with about 40 universities across the country. So clearly the mission's expanded, but it's great that there are these big research institutions that are eager and willing to partner with a group like ours.
Are you therapeutic area agnostic? Is it all therapeutics? Is it devices? I mean, what are your remit for?
Yeah, so first off, our structure. Maybe I should talk a little bit about our structure first, almost. It might help you understand kind of where we came from. So we recognized we had to bring both the talent to bear and the financial dollars to bear in order to be successful in the places we were going. And we didn't feel a traditional fund structure would be suitable for that. We actually felt we needed to really be a biotech company and actually be able to run drug development programs. And actually, if you look at our team makeup, I mean, we are a team, put myself aside, we're a team of scientists who actually have lots of years of drug development experience. And so the idea was work with the university, spin new technology into new portfolio companies, but then rather than trying to staff up each one, with whatever talent you could find, have the talent readily available within Orange Grove, deploy the talent on a partial FTE basis to that portfolio company, and then try to build a company locally. That's actually another big differentiator of our business. We really want to build companies locally where the technologies reside. We think that's how we help to contribute to the ecosystem. And there's usually a lot of good additional talent once you have the starting makeup of a company there. When you want to then add extra scientists, or you want to start hiring on clinical operations, the people are there in most of these ecosystems, but they're kind of waiting for that company to be formed and to be there that they can jump into. So that was a little bit about how we got started. And so because of that focus, we are almost like a pharma company. So we are very focused on therapeutics, right? There's a reason why for devices and diagnostics we can do as long as they sort of fit in with a companion diagnostic with therapeutic. But because of our team's expertise, we have to be pretty therapeutically focused. And then in terms of where we focus in terms of therapeutics, since we're not a fund, we don't actually have like legal limits on what we can and can't do. We technically could do any kind of therapeutic we want. I'll tell you, because of the makeup of our team, we really gravitate towards oncology, autoimmune inflammatory diseases. And my view on that is it'll probably make up about 80+% of our portfolio, but there's room in there for, we find something really incredible in another space that we're excited about, and we can pursue that. And things like ophthalmology, for example, has been one that we've toyed with as an area of interest, even if it may not perfectly fit in one of our buckets.
I think I'm back now. I was lagging before. I'm sorry about that. So it's really interesting. It's almost kind of a Moneyball strategy where you look at these universities that have been, really just kind of either underappreciated or not necessarily gotten the attention that they could have. And it's another spin on the good technology can come from anywhere. When you kind of come in, I imagine that in places where there actually hasn't been a lot of investor money or investor interest, it's almost kind of like a piranha feeding frenzy, right? I imagine you're very popular very quickly. So what are some of the things that you do to kind of go in a way that allows you to operate efficiently and also kind of build good credibility around kind of the early stage scientists? Because in many cases, for whatever reason, if you say, if you go in and you say no to somebody's idea, this obviously has some repercussions in how they may feel about you. How do you kind of manage that early set of interactions, both with the university and with the investigators?
Yeah, so we think a little bit more holistically about how do we build a university level relationship, right? And we actually took a few pages out of the Osage playbook. We think those guys really know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. The university relationship management. But we do a couple things. First off, we have an internship program that we run in a number of our university partners for PhD students in particular. And this is a way for us to, help to educate the next generation of biotech entrepreneurs in that ecosystem. And also it actually, some of those folks have joined our team. So it's actually a good way for us to ultimately recruit talent. And a lot of times they know what's going on in the academic labs better than almost anybody else, right? They're sitting there doing day-to-day research in these places. So they really know where some of the interesting ideas are sitting. We also do educational programs for the more senior academics. We know that they're far more knowledgeable than we are about their areas of expertise, but a lot of times they have no idea about some of the basics of drug development. Like what does a good tox package look like? What does CMC look like for the type of programs or modality they're looking at? So if we can provide some of that education, they can get better at pushing their science forward towards a drug, and then we can be a natural partner. So that's another way we look to engage. At the tech transfer level, we do try to set up regular touch points with tech transfer offices that we're close with, so that we can so that we can be close to the science, know when something really compelling is coming out. We're not sitting there waiting for it to really trickle out, but we can sometimes even hear about things before the materials are published, and that's really key if you want to jump in early onto something exciting. But then you kind of, you hit really, Derek, the nail on the head. We have to be very disciplined, right? We can't start a ton of companies. We're starting a handful of companies a year, and we have to set those expectations up front, right? We're not, as an organization, not set up to start 100 new companies simultaneously. It's just not going to happen. And so we make that very clear to tech transfer. And then when we talk to academics, we're clear, we make sure they know up front we're starting a couple of companies a year. We can commit to giving you good feedback, right? That's what we really hope to do, is ultimately to give feedback to academics. And we've tried our best with that. There's definitely a few where we're lagging, because it just our team's growing so fast right now. We're trying to keep up with everything, but we're going to get back to the few that we still haven't responded to. And the idea is we want to build those relationships over time, because just because something isn't the right fit today doesn't mean it won't be the right fit in a couple of years. A lot of times, the biggest reason we very often turn something down is it's too early for when we can get involved, right? It still doesn't have the right biological validation. It isn't close enough to a drug candidate. We're really looking for stuff that's 2 to 3 years at most from clinical stage, right? So our goal is to really focus on the call it the tail end of the academic work, and the really the drug development work, the IND enabling type of work that needs to go into developing a good package for the FDA. We aren't the experts, frankly, so we aren't the right people to say like what's the right basic biology experiments to identify this new MOA that may not be understood yet. Like that's an area where we'd have a harder time getting our heads around.
Yeah. Do you find that that's and it's interesting. I imagine you also take some cues out of how that conversation goes too, but do you find that people are mostly receptive to this is where we can play, this is where we think you are? Because ultimately, like you said, you start a few companies a year and it's not like you pick up and leave, right? I imagine you go into these things with a reasonably long time horizon and a reasonably kind of long tail reputation building mantra, if you will, so that you're not going to like drop in and drop out. You're going to actually be there to stay for a while.
Right. And so as a result, the reception so far has been very positive. The universities that we work with seem to like working with us, which is great. We're actually looking in terms of kind of formalizing many more of those relationships. We already had a number of them that were more formalized, but we're growing that pool of those that we have more structured checkpoints and more structured elements to the relationship. We find that many of the academics, have had good experiences working with our team and respect the work that we do. And so we think that's going to only continue, that momentum will continue to build over time. But obviously, it takes years to build these relationships, right? It doesn't happen 1, 2, 3. And some places that, we've been there a few years already and we're starting to, I think really hit our stride. And other places we're newer and we have to really prove ourselves still.
How do you, so like obviously a lot of whether it's a fund or a holding company, right, works across the academic spectrum across the country. How do you feel like that Orange Grove, how did you figure out what your sweet spot was for coming in and being ready to accept an asset or a PI from the universities you're working with?
So the way we got started, at least, it's a little bit of trial and error and feeling in the dark when you first get started, right? And our timing was, call it fortuitous or not fortuitous, but we were really in the planning stages prior to COVID, and then really got launched right at the eve of COVID was when we were kind of planning our launch. And so we thankfully had built the foundations of a lot of the relationships with universities just prior to COVID, over that, I call it 6 to 9 months before it. But then COVID hit, and obviously it's really hard to build those new relationships while you're in totally virtual mode. But thankfully we had those in place, and instead we worked on building upon what we'd already started and really shifted gears to saying, let's get a couple of really compelling companies launched and kind of shift from sort of relationship building to company building mode. Because I'd actually say the nice thing about this virtual period has been it's a good period to keep your head down, right? You're not going to too many like schmoozy conferences or networking events the same way. You're kind of going in and out, and so you really can keep your head down and just get stuff built, which for us I think was really 2020 was sort of a pivotal period for us to grow our first few companies. And now we're kind of at the point where we're actually kind of excited to get back out there at some conferences, get some schmoozy events, and just to reconnect with our network and look to build some new relationships. But it helped us get the foundation built.
We actually have had a few questions, so yeah, I don't want to let them linger too long. So here's a capital question, right? Does Orange Grove invest its own capital into your startups? If so, how much has Orange Grove raised for its own direct investment purposes?
Yeah, so we do invest directly into the companies that we build. It's a little complicated. We're not a fund, so we don't disclose how much money we raise as an entity. That's confidential information. And we also remember some of the money that we raise we use to deploy into our team or use to deploy into certain experiments we're trying to run to advance certain things that could become part of our portfolio, and some of it's actually invested into companies that we've built. Or that we're looking to partner with. It's kind of a mix, which I think is a little bit different from a fund where you have very strict controls as to how much can be invested into team versus invested into your actual companies that you're investing in. So those are kind of segregated accounts. Here it's a little bit all fungible, because frankly, if we decide that it's better in best interest of our company to put more money against growing our team to be able to more efficiently manage companies or look for new assets, that's how we're going to spend our capital versus spending it on, call it CRO services or development of existing companies. So it's a little bit there's a little bit of a delicate balance there, and it's part of where I think the holding company model is a little bit of an interesting one. It's flexible to let you do some of that. And then in terms of how we raise money at both the holding company level and at the specific opcos that we build. And we do that because, number one, there's a lot of really good local partners in the ecosystems that we go into. So if we're in New York, we want to partner with some of the local New York venture funds in building our companies and include them in the cap stack and have them as thought partners in those businesses. And then additionally, we recognize even if we could fund the whole seed round or the whole even a small Series A ourselves, it doesn't accomplish our aims, because we know that drug development is a very expensive process, and having a number of deep-pocketed partners around the table is very, very helpful. And so we look to build those syndicates as early as we can, right? We don't like to be the only capital provider. We are happy to lead in some of those deals. We will do that in cases, but only if we think there's a good mix of other people that are coming along with us.
Yeah, it's a team sport, as they say. So yeah, to add to that, so we have a question here, which is, how are you sourcing your experts or KOL input for clinical perspective? And I would ask more broadly, like, you have this strategy of building locally. How do you basically do the dichotomy of building a great team of experts while being able to have kind of local influence? Where's the gray area, and where is the shift there? I don't know if you're quite there yet or at that breaking point, but how do you think about that?
Yes, so just the SAB question is actually, it's a good one. It's actually we're actually well situated to find good SAB members, because when you work with so many different universities, you actually interact with a lot of different experts. And sometimes an expert, they may not have a technology that's a good fit for you, but they might be perfect for one of your advisory boards and another one of your companies. And so we actually found it very easy to find the right expertise from, looking across all the hospitals that we work with to really to populate those folks at our companies. In terms of the building locally versus kind of building centrally, I think we recognize at the earlier stages of preclinical development, those experts are in relatively limited supply, and they're in certain places, and you just need to find the best athlete for that role and fill it. So if you want the best kind of early stage medicinal chemist, like our Bill Miller, who oversees our chemistry, is fantastic, and wherever he's going to sit, we want Bill. So you have it, and we have a number of experts like that across toxicology, CMC, biochemistry, cell therapy, et cetera. And really, those are non-negotiable. Wherever those people are, we just want the very best people across the whole country. When it comes to as you start to move into building more of a company, you find you need a lot more clinical planning folks. That's where the team starts to really grow significantly as you start to get closer to the clinic. Sometimes there's a local scientific expert that works closely with the PI that you want to loop in because he was like an EIR or something in the project. Obviously, those people sometimes are really valuable, so you want to include those people. You have the academic, of course, who's very often a core part of the team. But as you start getting close to the clinic, you find that the team really grows meaningfully. And that's where you really try to do as much as you can locally. And you find that there's a lot of hubs around the country that may have been clinical sites or clinical planning sites for different pharma companies. A lot of that talent is there, but they may not have you probably couldn't find the best chemist in the world, but you probably can find clinical operations people. You probably can find even, SAB members or additional folks as you're growing to that next stage. I mean, it depends. Obviously, if you're in the middle of nowhere, maybe it doesn't work, but I can tell you New York City, that has not been finding that talent has not been our challenge.
Yeah, so that was going to be the next, softball question, which we're required to ask is tell us a little bit about attracting talent in New York City. We have to ask everybody that works here, and we kind of get the same answer every time, but we do love to hear it.
Yeah, no, I will tell you, the New York ecosystem has a lot of really great talent, particularly as you once you start a company and you're looking to kind of attract more talent in to really grow that business. I think like all other ecosystems, here's maybe where I'll throw a little bit of curveball in, finding those early stage startup entrepreneurs, right? Those are in short supply in every ecosystem. Those are really the ones that the experienced entrepreneur who knows what they're doing. And we've been lucky that we've been able to attract a couple of those folks in the New York ecosystem, which is great. But as I said, it's a small pool, but we can use those folks really to help build a lot of stuff, right? Because they can get things started, and then finding that additional, you want some additional great biologists, you want, you pick your area of expertise that you want. There's so much pharma talent in and around the New York area that once you're off to the races, you're off to the races. It's fine. And actually, the other nice, maybe I'll give a shout out here to Alexandria, because they've been a great party to work with as well. They really have been one of a number of players actually in really growing the ecosystem in terms of life sciences space. So I think there used to also be a shortage of that. We're now feeling like, there's multiple options. You can go to J Labs, you can go to Alexandria, you can go to Biolabs. Like you don't feel constrained the way you might have felt 5 years ago. So I think all those things are great for the ecosystem for everybody, and obviously our companies are capitalizing on that too, right? The access to talent and access to the space you need to really grow.
Yeah, when I came to New York Bio three years ago, it was the hand wringing and there's not enough space, and even in the 3 years we've had an amazing amount of space, come online. And one other thing that we've talked about, and this is not new either, right? It's that serial entrepreneur that's exited and is ready to do it again, right? And I think that takes time, right? You just have to have enough of those people who have done it, exited, and are ready to do it again. And we're just not quite there yet. So I think that's where we're growing that space. Hopefully all the exits are positive, right? But how do you approach a university to talk about finding like the right entrepreneur? Because we've had conversations with several of our academic institutions, particularly in New York, about how they're really trying to sort of increase the awareness and availability of, let's call them, entrepreneurial resources, right, for their scientists. And I don't know if that's happening across the country or what you're seeing sort of everywhere else.
So, different ecosystems are trying different things, like these EIR type programs, to try to get people close to the university. There are sometimes also just PIs have their own direct relationships of like, these are some guys I like working with that they'll bring to bear. I mean, the reality is there's always a shortage of that in most ecosystems, right? And so that's part of why the Orange Grove model was helpful. Is we said, let's go find those people, the very best of those people, get them into our organization full time, and then have them work across multiple of our companies. So instead of trying to find an entrepreneur for each one of those startups, which by the way, you really don't need a top level entrepreneur for every single early stage startup. It's actually not a good use of resources. They're too expensive to be deploying just to one company. Can we have those folks working on 2 or 3 companies at once? And as soon as something either gets sold or falls off the radar, the experiments fail, you just shift them around and move them on to new programs. And I think it also works well for the entrepreneurs too, because the reality is, when you're an entrepreneur, you also don't want to be sitting there unemployed, right? It's not an enjoyable aspect of the job. And so if we can help to mitigate, I mean, in Boston, they solved this through really the venture firms all have their own kind of EIR networks that people get launched from one company to the next. We don't really have that in New York or in other places to the same level. And so we're trying to, create our own version of that a little bit through kind of what we call full-time hires who are going to support multiple of our companies.
Yep. So this is related. There's another question here that if someone doesn't have their kind of a gang of scientists, how do you advise prospective biotech entrepreneurs, right? So so there's also the question of what is really a biotech entrepreneur at this point. But when you think about people who are biotech entrepreneurs or who want to be one, what's some of the advice that you would give? Because despite the funding numbers, it's not necessarily a forgiving funding environment. And like you said, you don't have the safety of really being able to spread yourself across multiple projects. So how do you think about, or what advice would you give to early stage entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, make sure you have a really strong network before you dive into it, right, from the get-go. Because I'd say that the thing that makes a lot of these certain entrepreneurs have a lot of success is they know the right funding sources, they have built the right experience, the right relationships over time. If you're getting to this a little too early in your career without the right support, it is really, really tough, and your probability of success is a lot lower. So I'd almost encourage folks get the right other stuff under your belt first. You can be a successful entrepreneur versus someone who's going to be out there struggling in the wilderness for a while. If you once you kind of are ready to make that plunge, I think first off, know that you're in for a tough road for a period of time, right? That's just the nature of it. I can tell you, even Orange Grove, like our first year was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get things up and running. It's just the nature of any of these kinds of businesses. But obviously, once you get there, it's very rewarding. So I'm not discouraging people from doing it. Just go in eyes wide open. And then I think the other key thing is you got to make sure if you're going to be successful, it's going to be both on your management skills as well as the quality of the science that you're investigating. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't spend the time thinking about themselves as a venture capitalist, but you actually have to run your own due diligence process, right? You need to find the right program to tie yourself to, right? You have one shot at that point. Essentially, you're going to be tied to one thing for a period of years. Spend the time, do the full diligence. Like I can tell you, we look at about 100 programs for every one that we actually push forward. It is a needle in a haystack business to find the perfect fit. And I would encourage entrepreneurs to do a similar thing. And my last thing is just a pitch maybe for our organization. They say if you're an experienced entrepreneur or someone who's really looking to meaningfully be in that space, and you're kind of in in any you're in like the New York ecosystem, for example, give me a call. Right, we are growing our team, and it's always good to find successful entrepreneurial talent in the ecosystem and provide what I'd say like a little bit of a different experience than maybe being the single solo entrepreneur. We're basically trying to be an entrepreneur with a support network a little bit in how we drive our business.
Yeah, that would be great. And as a reminder, the webinar series does not have a headhunter based finder's fee. It's all kind of good words, and thank you on here if anything is successful. So just to build on that, we got a question from an entrepreneur that I've known for a while. I think he's done an incredible job building this company. He said, "I'm a Florida-based entrepreneur, self-funding an early-stage gene therapy NewCo, producing positive proof of concept data on the first of 3 assets that are all patented. So it's working in hearing loss. It's a huge growing market, no approved therapies." And he's talked to 58 prospective investors with 17 under CEA. And his question is, would you look at my investor deck, right? And he's done an incredible job. This is somebody that has really kind of been along this road for a long time. And I've seen the deck. I think he has a really interesting product that is not kind of looking at the same thing that other gene therapies are actually looking at in the space.
Yeah, so I'd say we're happy to look. I'd say we're a little bit different than other groups. We're really not looking to become a venture fund, right? We're a builder of companies, and so we will partner with early stage entrepreneurs and actually supply a lot of the team, and I think that provides a little bit of a different kind of cut to a cap stack even from the common equity standpoint, because we actually run and manage the companies. Obviously, we're willing to partner with her to do that, but it's a little bit of a different offering than working with a venture fund, which is, I think, more looking to come in as the preferred equity, wanting the entrepreneur to just kind of run the business on their own and build their team. And so it's a bit of a different model. And so I'd say we're not shy to explore that with people, but we want to just be upfront about it, right? I think a lot of entrepreneurs kind of want to run their show, and they're really looking for a capital source, and that's not really what we are.
Yeah, and that also, then we have another question that's in that sort of similar structure question, right? And I think you've answered how Orange Grove is structured. And then I think this question is more of how do you structure your companies, right? And then how the university, how you handle the IP license options, and what sort of equity do university inventors receive?
Got it. So this is a tricky one, because the answer is a lot of the stuff is all over the map, right? It really depends, the technology, the university, how many founders are involved, how many universities are involved, right? So the numbers there vary widely. I can tell you that one limiting factor we have, and it's really not been an issue with really the universities we work with, but we hear stories of it kind of in the ecosystem. And I think it's probably a bigger issue, frankly, in more Boston and San Francisco, where there's some universities need very, very large amounts of equity. And I think that makes it harder to be an entrepreneur in those ecosystems, right? To find the equity to put the team and everything else around the table. It makes it harder for our model to work, where our organization profits from both common equity and preferred equity. I mean, that's sort of the alignment. If we're going to drive the program forward and be the team, we need to have that common equity to incentivize not just Orange Grove overall, but we actually incentivize individual team members at the company level. And so we need that equity to be able to do that effectively and increase the probability of success. So it's always a careful balance. And if the numbers are way off and it's not going to be doable, we obviously have to know our own limitations, right? Here the reality is our goal is to build successful companies, and I need to incentivize, great drug developers to work on that. And obviously, those people, aren't need to receive equity for that to make sense. So I gotta obviously just be mindful of all that. But as I said, we do try to be flexible, and we do try to work with the different universities that have different structures that are required. We do work with different academics who have different expectations, and try to level set with them and figure out what is mutually sensible. And we work with, sometimes, as I said, with these kind of EIRs that are working with an academic, and try to figure out a way to incorporate them into what we're building, as long as it's reasonable, as long as their role makes sense going forward, right? If their vision of what they want, the direction they want to take the business, and what they want to do with it, and such doesn't align with ours, well, we're probably not going to be a great partner. So we gotta figure that out early, so that there's too much risk already in drug development from science. You got to minimize kind of the team risk and the other structural risks as much as possible, as early as possible.
Yeah. So we have another question here from the person who's the new vice president of tech transfer at NYU, Marc Sedem. Great to have you. Great to have you on the program. He said you hit on a really big challenge in university tech transfer in terms of due diligence, but his second question here is, how do we do better with equity, diversity, and inclusion at the early stage seed level to ensure that our innovators and founders are representative of society writ large? And that's a challenge. That's a challenging question, but he asked it of you.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a challenging question, and I think it's even made harder by the fact that, when you have an industry, I mean, I think like many industries, that wasn't as focused on this historically. It's harder to find those folks who have the years of experience, right? To find them the kind of minority entrepreneur who's had 3 exits, right? Well, if they haven't had the chance to do it the first couple of times, you're not going to find them on the third go around now. And so, we've taken that very much to heart in how we build our business. Right. So, especially because we recruit, as I said, a lot out of our PhD internship programs into our full-time hires. We really think long and hard about that, and we've really been doing I think a pretty good job of slowly but surely growing some of those folks. Not all of it's yet up on our website. It's kind of a work. Our website's a little bit of a work in progress. And we have another number of folks joining us kind of by late in the year and early next. But we take that a lot into account in our newer hires, and our hope for those folks, by the way, this is how we're trying to build ecosystems, is we want to turn those folks into people who are kind of early in their career and learning, into folks who can step into C-suite level roles in biotech companies in sort of over a 5 to 7 year period within our portfolio. And so for us, it's potentially a more structured path to get some of those folks from PhD programs to kind of senior leaders in biotech that can help then be hopefully the next generation of our organization, right? We're kind of setting ourselves up for hopefully the longer term future. How universities do that, I think, is also a challenge. I think they need to probably have to look to that younger talent as well, right? Look to their PhD pool where there is a lot more diversity, and really try to cultivate some of those folks into becoming entrepreneurs and giving them the right resources to be successful. I'm all for partnering with universities to help make some more of that happen, right? That's a big initiative for us as well, whether they're part of Orange Grove or whether they're just kind of in the ecosystem doing entrepreneurial things.
Yeah, and we in New York,
well, I mean, I think
we have a task force that's looking at even earlier, right? So like, where can we as a community work even earlier within the schools and undergrad to encourage diverse communities to choose science as a career option? So I think it's going to take everybody working across the spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's really commendable. Your organization is kind of bringing a lot of people into the fold, even if in some cases it's temporary, but you're giving a lot of people exposure. And that means a lot in terms of where they go in a career. It means a lot in terms of what kind of skills they can develop. And it means a lot in terms of kind of getting them exposed to that experience early. And I wanted to make sure that we brought up another group of people. You're actually starting a podcast series where you're going to be talking directly to patients and getting patient input too, which, we at our patient engagement summit, it's this past March, we've been doing much more on the patient advocacy and patient engagement front. I think this is hugely important and actually going to play a much bigger role in how we think about science going forward. So, Bud, from your position, this is, you're really one of the first groups that I've ever heard actually try and do this from an investment standpoint. So can you talk a little bit about the genesis of really where you came up with the idea and how you'd like to see it help you?
Yeah, and actually just really help the whole ecosystem. Really, the origins of it really came from conversations we were having with the Autoimmune Registry, which is a nonprofit really focused on patients suffering from autoimmune diseases, and they were very focused on the patient's voice and encouraging patients to enroll in clinical trials to hopefully make for a better future for people suffering from those diseases, and that message really resonated a lot with us because frankly, treating autoimmune and inflammatory disease is a very big part of what our business is. We have several companies in that and focused on that space. And we'd always spoken, our team members always talk about being sort of patient focused and patient centric. When you're a preclinical organization, you sometimes lose sight of that, right? You're so deep in the science, and we're like, how can we as an organization hopefully bring a little bit more of that patient perspective to our team as a starting place, right? And really by partnering with the Autoimmune Registry, we realized that actually a podcast where even some of our team members, really Diane Yu from my team, she's really taken a lead here and has been interviewing a lot of these patients, and I think it's really changed her perspective. I'm hoping to get other members of the team to ultimately take on some of that role as well in terms of interviewing. I think we're having a one-on-one direct conversation with a patient changes their perspective a bit, and so it helps us as a team stay closer to the patients. And then sort of publicizing it, we felt it was important to get the stories out there. I mean, these are people suffering from serious diseases like Graves' disease, MS, ankylosing spondylitis. I mean, these are serious diseases, and a lot of them, frankly, are not household names that people go around saying all the time. And so getting their stories out there for the wider audience, I think, was also helpful. And my hope is that we actually made a really big push to get the podcast out there on university campuses, because we felt it's really important for people who are studying biology and chemistry and at the undergrad level, studying at the PhD level, academics who are working in labs, for them to get the same perspective, right? Because I think they, just like us, are working with early science. You lose sight of, like, why are we all actually doing some of this stuff? Why should we be translating this research? Well, ultimately, it's to hopefully change people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting when we started working on our patient engagement summit. We had all, like you and a lot of companies talk about being patient centric and patient focused. And as we started to drill down, we realized there was a real need for even our patient advocacy organization partners to have a broader audience to tell their story beyond those who were just interested in maybe one specific, disease or therapeutic area. And so it was really great. And we actually have a free membership for patient advocacy organizations, so they can further plug in and engage with our entire community. So that was really one positive thing that came out of that.
Got it. No, I'm glad to see efforts like that. It's you guys are thinking along the same lines that we were. So there's multiple different ways to engage with patients, and I think it's been a great help for our organization. I'd encourage other biotech entrepreneurs and companies to do similar things. It really does help to emphasize why we're all doing what we're doing, right?
Yeah, and we can put the link to your podcast. Derek always does our social media stuff, but we can also add it to our website. So
great. Yeah, I think we have 3 episodes up so far, and there's about 4 or 5 more ready to go. So yeah, would love to folks from New York Bio and just the general New York ecosystem and to have that same access to what we're up to.
Yep, I can. I will post them to both Twitter and LinkedIn. I did one last week with all of them, but I'll post them to Twitter and LinkedIn again. They're terrific. I think we, as scientists, we often have a pretty good idea about trying to figure out the molecular basis of the patient. But I think one of the biggest things is we get a better perception of how the patient lives their life, about how things affect them. We've had a couple of these discussions with people where you actually talk about how this affects what they do during the day, what they're able to do, and really kind of how they perceive themselves. So ultimately, we realize that kind of patients are people, and in one way or another, we're all patients. But I think that kind of quote unquote end user viewpoint is really important. So we had Anthony Johnson had came in with a question of, Cambridge has the restaurant and bar Catalyst in the middle of Kendall Square. He asked if there's a meetup spot in New York that we think is good for biotech. I had mentioned to Anthony that I had run a bunch of these evening meetups over kind of the past 10 years, which we hope will kind of come back soon. But if you could pick one meetup place in New York for all of biotech, where would it be?
That's a tough question, right?
It is. It's not easy.
Um, there's kind of a lot of good spots. Actually, one that I've always really liked, just because it actually kind of is a biotech meetup spot, even if it's just kind of a small cluster, is in the Alexandria Towers. They have that restaurant there that people do, and usually in the summertime sit out and have drinks out there. And so I've had some very good kind of biotech conversations with people sitting out there. And I think there's probably similar ones to some of the other incubators around the city. So I'm not saying that's the only restaurant that does that. Yeah, the problem I think with New York is such a big city with so many other areas, other industries that have big presences there too. It's not just a biotech city, and probably as much as we love biotech to be a big part of it, it's never going to be just a biotech city. And so you have to kind of navigate the finance hotspots and a lot of the other hotspots. As a lot of the industry has shifted more downtown, I would love to because I've seen there's obviously a lot more the innovation industries popping up around Soho and even further down than that. I remember, early on in my career, and I think this area hasn't been as vibrant, and maybe I think it's coming back now. Was Stone Street, right? It used to be a really vibrant area all the way downtown and around South Street Seaport as well. I'd love to see some of those areas come back and people kind of gravitate to some of them just because they were fun outdoor spots where you could get a larger group together. They kind of can expand to fit the group as numbers grow. One idea I actually do have, and I'll throw this out there. I haven't really thought this fully through. There actually is a lot of good meetups that occur of the public markets biotech arena in New York, right? I think New York has an interesting strength in that the financial community is really strong. I came from that world, and there is a huge public equities biotech. Like New York is the place to be for all of that. And if there were ways to, and frankly, those folks are always trying to get insights on early stage science. If there are ways to coordinate with some of the banks to bring some of the earlier stage people together with some of these kind of more public markets oriented investors, I think there'd be some interesting synergies there. And I don't know what venue would be right to accommodate all of that, but maybe it's worth a call to a couple of the investment banks to say, can you guys coordinate something, figure something out. But I think both groups could benefit. I think a lot of public markets investors are trying to move earlier. A lot of early stage folks here are trying to really expand their wings and find new sources of capital and just new idea sources. And we should be kind of marrying those strengths together.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we've really been working on. We had started this emerging company summit, and we had we really looked at the public markets and the financial industry as a huge strength of New York City, and one that we wanted to be more connected to, because ultimately it's the public markets that fuel most late stage translational studies. It's extremely intertwined. So I think this is something that we're certainly going to be more involved with over the next few years, and we look for opportunities to get them involved with us. Just on the social front, it's funny you mentioned that it's a challenge of New York. I actually think it's an opportunity, because it is so big, and we're going to have these outposts around the city. I almost look at it as a kind of European Premier League soccer fan type of things. You'll have places that are up around InnoLabs, around JLabs, around Alexandria. And if we have kind of the common biotech places around each one, I think that's just fine. You can have your Arsenal fans and your Liverpool fans, if you will. They're just going to be a little more geographically distributed.
Yeah, Bill Harvey threw in his recommendation for what I assume is Long Island City into the chat.
It is. Yeah, he's thrown in Fifth Hammer Brewing Company and a good plug for InnoLabs. So I think from what you said, it just points to the fact that we're lucky in a lot of ways. As of 5 or 6 years ago, you're right, there weren't a lot of options, and now we look at the number of lab space options that are coming online. It is now, knock on wood, not going to be a problem, right? There's going to be lab space available. We are going to have places to put companies. We are going to have places to recruit companies in here. So I've been excited about New York City for a long time, but it's just been really amazing to see how these pieces are falling together now, and I think the growth is going to be exceptional. So sorry, I'm catching up on
Yeah.
a
So
question or two here.
actually,
So
back to the due diligence. Let's flip it back, right, to how Orange
yeah,
Grove does your due diligence. We had a good question. It says doing diligence on early stage academic science is difficult. Many company creation venture capital firms still struggle with this. How do you differentiate and compete even against those groups?
Right. So how we compete is very different from, I guess, how we run a diligence process, right? In terms of how we compete, I think it's really the local offering that we're able to provide, and the fact that we come there not just with capital, but with the right team to be able to really launch these businesses, and the fact that we're focused on, there's different things for different folks, right? We're focused on certain geographies and looking for certain types of programs, and other people are looking at other geographies and looking for different types of programs. We will look, for example, at both platforms as well as single assets. I know there's a lot of venture firms that will not look at single asset approaches. Our idea is we can take a few of those, and there's ways to creatively explore how to build companies around those. But it's a little bit of a heavier lift, so not everybody's looking for that. So we don't find there's always competition out there. I don't think there's a ton of competition in what we're doing in the earlier stage landscape. Everyone's kind of looking for their own thing, so it actually works pretty well. And there's frankly so much opportunity out there right now that I think the bigger limitation is as Derek was alluding to in the beginning, is like, how do you sift through the gazillion opportunities, the piranha feeding frenzy, as you described it, right? So
yeah,
I think that's more the challenge that we face in our business, and how we run our diligence process is pretty regimented process, which I don't think would be highly dissimilar from other venture groups, because there's kind of a series of things you need to look at when you're identifying a program. You look at the biological validation, you got to look at the IP, you have to look at the commercial viability of the program, the competitive landscape. There's like a list of maybe 15, 20 things you need to really go through. And I think people, maybe in different ways decide which one of those things are most important and they're going to go to first, right? For us, a lot of that is we'll jump right to commercial viability kind of right at the beginning and say, does this thing kind of make long-term business sense, before we ever get really deep into does the biology make sense or not, right? Is the MOA actually good? And we have 3 or 4 checkpoints that our team members go through to ensure that we really do go through all of these different elements. It's not an easy process, and we were trying to get the diligence process down to about 4 to 6 weeks eventually. But I can say on average now we're probably more like 8 to 10 by the time all is said and done. It just takes a lot of time and a lot of manpower to actually make all these things happen. And you want to talk to different experts in that particular sub area and make sure you check your boxes. So it is a rigorous process. That's before you ever start your licensing and your other. This is why it takes a long. Company creation
yeah,
is not for the faint of heart, right?
Yeah.
What I would say diligence is not necessarily where we would differentiate ourselves from our peers. I think a lot of our peers do very rigorous diligence as well, right? A lot of other venture groups are very rigorous too, and power to them. That's how you are successful. That's how you need that to be successful. But I think we actually have learned a lot from what those groups have done to then figure out, like, where do we start our diligence process? How do we try to make it as efficient as possible? And hopefully, if something isn't going to be good, shut it down as quickly as possible. Right? Saying no to people and being able to knock things off quickly is so key when you're looking for a small number of opportunities in a very large pool of available projects.
Yeah. And
yeah,
actually, a question that just literally came in, I think, based on what you were saying, says building on your point about so much opportunity that's out there now, there seems to be a lot of capital going to certain value pools, oncology, cell and gene therapies. How do you think about diversification of therapeutic areas as you get into this, or is it better to really focus narrowly? You've obviously made a choice for Orange Grove, but how did you arrive at that
yeah,
choice?
Yeah, so I think, if you're going to be a company builder, you have to have deep expertise in what you do, right? And for us, that was around immunology. So we can't bite off everything in the universe, because we'd have to hire the experts for everything. I mean, we've even noticed, like, we made a real push towards cell therapy because we recognize it's a big part of immunology, and we had to build out a whole cell therapy working group, right, within the organization. It is a huge lift, and we're going to have to figure out how to build, CMC and manufacturing for that eventually, and it's a huge effort just to do that one modality for like one type of disease. And so the broader you get in the company building arena, I think the harder it gets to kind of try to tackle everything from the get-go is very, very daunting. I think if you're just investing into other groups, I think you have more flexibility to say, great, I'm going to do a little neuro, I'm going to do a little this. I kind of can pull in the right scientific experts to help me do my diligence, but I'm not building the business plan. I'm not actually trying to build a manufacturing facility. I'm just kind of relying on the management teams and their efforts to make that happen. So I think there's more flexibility if you're going to be a Series A, Series B type of investor.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, you have to have kind of the vision that goes beyond, that goes beyond kind of the first tranche of money that you put in. And like you said, you're in this for the long haul. This is not a short-term experiment. And it's not something that you can just kind of trade into and trade out of. So, you've gotten Orange Grove off the ground now, and we've got a few minutes left. So, where would you like to see Orange Grove go in the next few years? Because ultimately, I imagine if you're starting things early, you're going to have things that are going to the clinic. Do you see the structure of the company changing at all? You're going to have some really big capital needs if you do things right now and things actually start to progress to the clinic. You're going to need a lot more money. So how does Orange Grove change? Not to put too fine a point on it, but how does Orange Grove change in order to try and meet that challenge?
Yeah. So you're setting us up well. So Orange Grove has started to raise more and more money from deeper pocketed groups. Actually, some venture, I'd say actually a lot of interest from the venture and biotech hedge fund communities. And we're going to be going out there and raising more money as we get later in the year. Like we're definitely anticipating a much bigger raise coming forward, and we're doing that not just at our holding company level. By the way, we're doing that at our portfolio companies too, right? We're trying to figure out how to raise the right size seed rounds to actually get to some very meaningful inflection points in our companies. And you're going to see that those seed rounds that may have started out, in some of the cases only been a couple million at first, we're now looking at kind of larger $1 million type of raises for even that seed round to really get things pushed forward. So I fully agree with you there. We're also looking at some new partnerships, which can also bring in, other people's dollars to help push forward things in our portfolio. We're looking at that in Europe to help accelerate some of the stuff that we're contemplating. We're looking at New York City as well. So we're trying to be very creative. As this is where I kind of started my conversation with telling you I came from the finance industry and the legal industry, and there's a lot of ways to be creative to try to generate more dollars that you can put into drug development. We are pulling many of those levers, and we're going to be pulling a bunch more as you kind of, if we have this conversation a year from now, I'll be able to give you some more specific examples for you. But that is certainly where our heads are at, and kind of stay tuned. As I said, we're targeting raising some more meaningful dollars kind of later in the year.
Well, that's great. I mean,
Oh, I was gonna say, as a recovering litigator who has now found my questioning ability again through our webinar series, it delights me when other people use their early skills to do great things in the future, and particularly in New York Biotech.
Yeah. And we spend a lot of time with people that are doing early stage science and early stage investing, and you're building teams, you're doing things that are really going to enrich the ecosystems that you're in. You're doing, you're building this out, so you're getting direct patient input. It's hard for anybody not to root for you, right? It sounds like you're doing all of the right things, and to the drugs that you're going to develop, I think you're going to have a really big impact in ways that you might not have even thought of in the first place. So it was a pleasure having you on today, and we're all pulling for you. We think you're doing a great thing.
Great. Well, we'll really appreciate you having me on, and Jennifer, Derek, really appreciate all the great work you guys are doing at NewYorkBIO to help build the ecosystem too. So looking forward to continuing to partner to make New York Biotech ecosystem great.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Marc.
Care.
Thanks. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on NewYorkBIO, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.